Some people grow up learning how to read a room before they ever learn how to read a book. They sense tension before words are spoken. They feel responsible for moods that aren't theirs. If you're an empath who wasn't emotionally protected as a child, this may not feel like a personality trait. It may feel like survival. And today we're going to talk about the traits that quietly form when sensitivity grows in an environment where emotional safety was missing.
When empathic children grow up without emotional protection, they don't stop feeling, they learn to adapt. They learn to scan, anticipate, and absorb. As a child, you may have noticed that your feelings were ignored, minimized, or overwhelmed by someone else's emotions. You may have learned that being sensitive was inconvenient, dramatic, or unsafe. So instead of being protected, you became the protector, not just of others, but of the emotional environment itself.
One of the first traits that develops is emotional hyperawareness. You don't just notice emotions, you monitor them. You can sense when someone's mood shifts before they say anything. You pick up on subtle changes in tone, energy, or body language. This isn't intuition by accident. It's a skill learned from needing to predict emotional danger early. As a child, knowing how others felt helped you stay safe. As an adult, it can feel exhausting.
Another trait is chronic self-monitoring. Emotionally unprotected empaths often learn to edit themselves constantly. You watch what you say, how you say it, and how it might land. You replay conversations later, wondering if you upset someone or said too much. This doesn't come from insecurity alone. It comes from growing up in an environment where your emotional expression had consequences, so you learned that being careful was safer than being real.
Many empaths from emotionally unsafe childhoods also develop people-pleasing patterns. Not because they want approval, but because harmony once meant stability. Keeping others calm, happy, or comfortable reduced emotional chaos. Over time, this can turn into prioritizing other people's needs over your own, even when it costs you energy, peace, or identity. Saying no may feel heavy, even when you know it's necessary.
Another common trait is emotional independence taken to an extreme. You may struggle to ask for help or express vulnerability, not because you don't need support, but because you learned early that emotional needs were not reliably met. So you learn to self-soothe, self-regulate, and self-contain. On the outside, you may appear strong and composed. On the inside, you may feel unseen.
Empaths who weren't protected emotionally often develop a deep fear of being a burden. You may hesitate to share your struggles, worrying that your emotions will overwhelm others. This comes from being subtly taught that your feelings were too much, so you learn to carry them quietly. Over time, this can lead to emotional isolation, even in close relationships.
Another trait is heightened empathy for wounded or emotionally unavailable people. You may feel drawn to those who struggle, hurt, or need understanding. This isn't random, it's familiar. As a child, you may have learned to empathize with caregivers instead of being cared for. That pattern can repeat in adulthood, where you give deeply and hope someone will eventually give back in the same way. There's also a strong inner critic that often develops. When emotional protection is missing, children tend to internalize blame. You may unconsciously believe that if something went wrong emotionally, it was your fault. This can turn into perfectionism, over-responsibility, or constant self-correction. You try to be better, quieter, easier, more acceptable.
Many emotionally unprotected empaths struggle with emotional boundaries. Because your feelings weren't clearly separated from others as a child, you may still absorb emotions that aren't yours. Someone else's stress can feel like your own. Someone else's disappointment can sit in your body for hours. You may feel drained without knowing why.
Learning boundaries can feel unnatural at first, even though they're essential. Another trait is emotional depth combined with delayed self-understanding. You feel deeply, but it may take time to recognize what you're feeling. As a child, you may not have been guided to name or validate your emotions, so now feelings show up as tension, fatigue, or overthinking before they become clear. You may need quiet time alone to sort through what your body already knows. Despite these challenges, there is also a quiet strength that forms. Emotionally unprotected empaths often develop resilience, insight, and emotional intelligence beyond their years. You understand pain, complexity, and nuance. You can hold space for others in ways that feel natural. These traits are not flaws, they are adaptations. But adaptations don't have to become life sentences. Healing begins when you realize that the traits you developed were responses, not identities. You are not overly sensitive. You were underprotected. You are not too much. You learned to carry too much alone. When you begin to offer yourself the emotional safety you didn't receive, these traits soften. Hyperawareness becomes intuition. Independence becomes choice. Empathy becomes balanced. Learning to emotionally protect yourself now means validating your own feelings, setting boundaries without guilt, and allowing yourself to need support. It means recognizing that your sensitivity is not a weakness, but it requires care, the same care you instinctively offer others. If you're an empath who grew up without emotional protection, none of this means something is wrong with you. It means your nervous system adapted to survive, and survival traits can be reshaped into self-honoring traits when safety becomes internal instead of external. If parts of this felt deeply familiar, you're not alone. And if you're beginning to see your patterns with more compassion instead of judgment, that's where real change begins. Stay connected if you want to keep exploring the psychology behind empathy, trauma, and healing. Because understanding your past isn't about reliving it, it's about finally giving yourself the emotional protection you always deserved.